Hello and welcome. As I said to Rachel just before we all got together, this is a talk which is not a particularly long one, but I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of those of you who are in the room with me on this. And I also have to acknowledge that there are some aspects of what I'm going to say where I bow to the serious expertise of some of our wonderful collaborators on Old Ways, New Roads, most notably Nigel and John Bonehill, Nigel Leask and John Bonehill, whose knowledge in this area outstrips most of the rest of the world put together. So this is not an attempt in any way to redefine or rethink their wonderful thoughts in the show. This is the watercolour that gives the show its title. And as many of you will know, it is one of a group of similar watercolours in the exhibition. And most particularly, it's one of a particular group of watercolours made in the Southern Hebrides in August 1772 by a variety of the three artists who accompanied Banks on his journey that ultimately was to end up in Iceland and passed. We'll talk a little bit about Isla and Jura in a few minutes' time, but passed from London up through the Southern Hebrides, up ultimately through the Sound of Mull, ending up in Iceland, and then back down through Orkney later on at the end of the summer in the autumn. Rachel made a passing observation last week when she gave the title of this talk that this was a patch of the world, Oronsay, that is of particular familiarity to me. And so that was one of the reasons why I was attracted to talk about this. But what I really wanted to consider was how views such as this, put into exhibitions such as Old Ways, New Roads, how they've been received, how they are looked at through the eyes as much as anything else of the 21st century, but also what they say or what they don't say about what was happening in the world in which they were actually made, in which these views were taken, the things that were going on, the things that weren't going on immediately around the artists and the people who were commissioning the drawing. So the remarkable thing about this particular drawing, one of a series, and I'll show you a couple more in a minute, one of a series of drawings made on Oronsay in the Priory in August, on the 8th of August, the original drawings, the 8th of August 1772. One of the wonderful and remarkable things, and I suspect the reason why this particular drawing was selected for the exhibition, is that it shows two antiquarian gentlemen clearly measuring medieval remains that they'd found in the cloister of Oronsay Priory. Exactly the early history of Oronsay and its priory still remains somewhat tentative, but it's generally thought that it was founded sometime as a monastic foundation in the 6th century or thereabouts. The main buildings that one sees the remains of now are from the 14th century, and they're an Augustinian foundation. The remarkable thing about Oronsay, in many respects, and its bigger neighbour Colonsay, is the number of ecclesiastical remains of various sorts that are still, at least their remnants, to be found on the island. But the Oronsay Priory is very definitely the one that has long attracted attention, because it's the one that is most complete. And to anybody making that voyage through the Southern Hebrides, as Banks did in 1772, it's not at all surprising that they would wish to stop off. Perhaps the strange thing is that it's Oronsay that is the immediate focus of attention in terms of getting there and landing by boat in the 18th century. And as we'll see right at the end of this talk, that ability to come and go from Oronsay, now, if you are familiar with that part of the world, almost nobody, apart perhaps in the old days, the Queen arriving with Britannia, almost nobody comes straight into Oronsay anymore. Everybody arrives through the little pier at Scalasay. But the ability to come to Oronsay and to see it really in its own right is a remarkable part of the way that the island was viewed right up until the early years of the 20th century. And here, taken courtesy of Calmac only a couple of weeks ago, in a rare moment of sunshine, you can see on the right Ben Oronsay. If you look, and I will see if I can just show you there, in fact, is the priory under the lee of Ben Oronsay, and just here is Oronsay House, and there is a really important feature of what I really wanted, what attracted my attention to this little series of drawings that I want to reference in a minute or two. So here, Cloyster, another of the drawings made by one of the three artists that Banks had on his voyage in 1772, James Miller. Here, the rather wonderful general view of the priory with the splendid cross just sitting next to it. And I will show you the last of the three views, and another view here of the examination by that same group, again within the ruins of the priory. An antiquarian party and some colourful locals examining remains within the space of the abbey. The thing that I was particularly curious about in this series of drawings, as I say, quite rightly, the ruins were attracting the attention of antiquarians. Thomas Pennant had been there, and the sequence of visitors to the priory who are specifically interested in the priory is something that picks up, and visitors throughout the late 18th and into the 19th century, is that one of the earlier or sort of immediately previous visitors to Oronsay in the mid-1760s had been the Reverend John Walker, minister at Moffat, who had been commissioned by the Commission for Annexed Estates to go off and make an account of various Hebridean islands and to write these up. And whilst Walker in the 1760s alludes to the fact that there is, of course, a priory there, the thing that he's interested in, and the thing that is really remarkable now to those who know Oronsay is Walker's observations on the fertility of the land and the way in which 30 people, 5 or so families, are making a really good living out of the 800 or so acres of cultivated and good quality farmland that the island has, to the extent that the observation is made frequently in the second half of the 18th century that the farm in Oronsay that is held intact by the younger son of the McNeils, who owned both Colonsay, Oronsay, and actually large tract of Jura and Gear at this stage, that this is the best managed bit of the estate. And most particularly that the sheep imported into Oronsay from Ireland a few decades earlier are really producing some of the very, very finest wool in the Hebrides at that stage. And Walker goes out of his way to lament the fact that the husbandry and the quality of the agricultural input and improvement that is going on in Oronsay isn't being reflected elsewhere. And it's surely no accident that it is in almost exactly 1772, at the time that Banks arrives in Oronsay and his artists make these records, that the house that now stands on Oronsay House, is very much improved and becomes a perfectly respectable 18th century farmhouse, which, as I say, in most respects still stands much the same form, improved, but much the same form that it was made at almost exactly that point. So the arrival of antiquarian visitors actually coincides with a really notable change in the fortunes of this particular island. And Walker again notes just how the opportunities to export wool need to be taken up. It's also very curious, as I say, that the neighboring island, Colonsay, is scarcely visited at all in this context and in others, because in fact one of the very first classical houses in the Hebrides had been put up by the McNeils on the site of the abbey as opposed to the priory at Killoran at the northern end of Colonsay, half a century or so before, and it still remained really one of the better houses in this part of the world. But that very often only passing reference is made to the improvements that have been undertaken on Colonsay. Here is the other brother, John Frederick Miller's rendering of that cross. Here is just a reminder of the track of the Banks voyage through the Southern Hebrides. And the other reason that I just wanted to pick up on those drawings of Colonsay and to note their almost complete concentration on the antiquarian side of what they found on Oronsay is really in contrast to the investigation that the team made when they were exploring Isla a few days before they visited Oronsay. here at the very end of their time on Islay, by the way, is a fantastic little sketch made just off really at the entrance to the Sound of Islay of the Paps of Jura. There was an expedition made up the Paps, a scientific expedition up the Paps at the end of it, from which they would have been able to look back over Oronsay. And you can imagine that the level of investigation that they were able to undertake, scientific investigation they were able to take primarily about air pressure, altitude on the Paps, was something of a struggle, bringing their equipment up to the top of the Paps. But what I really wanted, as I say, to look at, just to put that series of Oronsay drawings into context, was the group of, or a couple of the drawings that were made, as I say, a few days earlier, as the team worked around what is now the almost archetypally improved village of Beaumont, little town of Beaumont on Islay. And it's nearby nearby surroundings on Loch Indal, which is the big inlet that cuts into Islay. And the reason I was so intrigued, as I say, by the contrast between what was done on Oronsay and what was done on Islay, is that here you see a view of the results of improvement. This is the ever-growing ruins of the little community, I think it's called Killaroo or Killaloo on Islay, which happened to find itself in the way of the improvement that was undertaken, the rather splendid Islay House that the Campbells of Shawfield were improving at that stage, just before they started to work on Beaumont, which really gets underway at, again, almost exactly the same moment that this expedition arrives in this part of the world. So we see, and there are a number of other drawings which show the dismantling of a community at this stage. And this, again, intrigued me because of the slight ambiguity about what it shows. And again, I know I've talked with both, well, I've talked with Nigel about the weavers' cottages before, and I know others have talked about these. But curiously, they are described as being at Beaumont and not at Killaroo, which is where the community was moved when it was cleared from the Islay House grounds to Beaumont. So these are described as being weavers' cottages at Beaumont. And I suppose my question really here is about, and I think this is alluded to by Nigel and others, is this actually a level of improvement? What was going on here? So the contrast in my mind, there are a number of fabulous antiquarian sites on Islay. Perhaps nothing as spectacular in terms of the sheer scale of the buildings on Oronsay. But on Islay, there are also, it should be said, documents, drawings of the newly re-established lead mines and various other activities of I suppose, economic improvement going on there. But curiously, agricultural improvement and activity, and a real track record on Oronsay is ignored completely in terms of the way that that bit of geography is approached. So to go back to these views on Oronsay, the other point that that particularly intrigued me about this whole approach to and literally the physical approach to the island is that as late as 1910, 1911, a series of digs was being undertaken by and commissioned by the Glasgow businessman Arthur Henderson Bishop. And as some of you may remember from the Guga exhibition that we held a couple of years ago at in the Hunterian Art Gallery, in the days when we could hold real exhibitions, there was a little case of the records made of the dig of primarily Neolithic material from Oronsay. And the thing that struck me, the message, the story that we told about that record of that campaign of archaeology in the early 20th century was that the approach of those who were arriving to investigate remains, in the case of Henderson Bishop, his archaeologist who went under the wonderful name of Mungo Buchanan, the approach was actually one almost of secrecy. This isolated place allowed them to behave in ways that perhaps they wouldn't behave elsewhere, to the extent that there is one moment when Henderson Bishop is encouraged to arrive again by sea and arrive directly at Oronsay, not to come to Colonsay first, because if he arrives with his being a successful Glaswegian businessman, if he arrives in his steam yacht off Oronsay, he will be able to take away the artifacts that they have found over the course of the summer and remove them without investigation and without due examination by the natives. There has been some question as a couple of boxes of material have gone out through Scalasag on Colonsay as to what was being removed and why it was being removed. So the idea of Oronsay as this site of investigation, this site of inquiry, is obviously remained deeply embedded in the minds of outsiders and those within the community who were quite rightly protective of what they had. But that curiosity and that the reputation of this place and the visual and public record of this place as somewhere where you could go to make discovery goes back clearly to this point in the 18th century and the point when these illustrations, these views were published. To sum up then and to wrap up, the idea of Oronsay as this delicate balance between one form of improvement and one form of history remains absolutely to the present day. And the irony, the sadness, or the success of it now, to some extent, is that the agriculture that's conducted on the island now is almost entirely in the context of it being run effectively. It's privately owned by a wonderful lady from New England, Fran Coburn, but it's run by the agriculture and the activities there are run by the RSPB. And so it has retained something of its agricultural past. The Abbey and its surroundings are absolutely beautifully maintained at the moment. So there is a new and very sort of precious balance here between its historical existence and its contemporary meaning. And again, when you look back to those two antiquarians measuring and examining and scientifically recording what they see in 1772, on the 8th of August, 1772, you have to wonder at the extent to which the better part of 250 odd years of interest in this very remote place, what it has done to its reputation in the outside world, but perhaps the corollary of that is that far from there being 5 families now on the island, for most of the time there are quite literally only a couple of people living there, and it is a place almost of total solitude, only visited by people who are doing much what those antiquarians can be seen doing in Miller's watercolour. Thank you.